Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to continue our look at Chapter 11, Observational Learning and Rule-Governed Behavior. So we will be starting our look at rule-governed behavior, some of the advantages, disadvantages of that, and how to apply that to personal rules in self-regulation. So when you make rules for yourself to change your own behavior. But before we get to that, we need to finish up our look at observational learning. So we're going to have a brief recap to remember what we did last time. And then we're going to take a look at observational learning and operant conditioning, specifically factors that affect acquisition of the information. So how to do a particular behavior. And then also factors that affect performance, that is the actual doing of the behavior. And then we'll take a look at a challenge to see if we can apply observational learning to explain the bystander effect. So just to briefly recap, observational learning, it's a new type of learning. It's a new phenomenon that we've just introduced. And it's when the behavior of a model is witnessed by an observer and the observer's behavior is changed. So that change in behavior is learning. And it happens simply because an observer, in this case, my daughter, observed the behavior of a model. The model was Shira. And because of that observation, and there was nothing else that occurred, she was not reinforced for lifting the stick. She was not reinforced for acting like Shira. The mere viewing or observing of that model caused the observer to subsequently change their behavior. So it's a form of learning. But this is learning through simple observation. So we took a look at classical conditioning in observational learning. We were talking about vicarious emotional responses. Now we're going to take a look at the other major form of learning that we've investigated, observational learning, and how it can impact operant conditioning. So this is involved in terms of acquisition and performance of the behavior. So two distinct aspects that you need in order to do a behavior. So the acquisition is actually gaining the knowledge on how to do the behavior. And the performance is actually doing the behavior. So these are two very different things. So you might have the desire to actually perform the behavior. Your performance might be at a high level, but you're not going to do the behavior if your acquisition is low. If you don't know how to do the behavior, you're not going to do the behavior. So without the acquisition, the behavior cannot be done correctly. On the other hand, you might have the acquisition of the behavior and yet still not engage in the performance of the behavior. So there are a lot of bad, morally corrupt behaviors that we all know how to perform. Right? There's a lot of low down dirty things that we as individuals know how to do. So we have the acquisition of that knowledge. However, we don't engage in the performance. We don't actually do the performance. So both of these are required in order for behavior to be performed. So in observational learning, you have to acquire the knowledge, and then you also have to perform the behavior. And observational learning, operant conditioning, took a look at the factors that affect whether or not you acquire the knowledge, and also the factors that affect whether or not you perform the behavior. And we're going to apply this to try to understand what happened to Isabella when she was 1.5, because she clearly modeled the behavior of Shira. But the interesting thing is that in that cartoon, in terms of mere exposure, in terms of mere trials, in terms of mere amount of observation, Shira is one of the main characters. The show is named after her. But another character that appears very frequently in the show as a kind of reverse Smurfette principle is Bo. Bo is the only male character in the rebellion, at least human male. And he is in just as much as Shira. He plays basically the Mansell in distress for most of the episodes. So he's in most of the episodes. Hordak, the main villain, is also in most of the episodes. So we have three models. We have three models that are doing certain behaviors, and yet Isabella, at 1.5 years old, chose to perform the behavior that Shira was doing, and chose either not to, so for some reason, she did not choose or did not end up doing the behaviors that either Bo did or Hordak did. So she chose to hold her sword aloft, as Shira does, but there was no instance of her pretending to, pull back on a bow. There was no instance of her pretending that her arm is a rocket cannon. So why was it that she acquired and performed the behavior that Shira showed, while she did not either acquire or perform the behavior of either Bo or Hordak? So those are the factors that we're going to take a look at. And one of the first factors, we're going to take a look at acquisition first. And one of the first factors that determined whether or not an observer will acquire the knowledge of the behavior that the model is demonstrating is the consequences of the model's behavior. So, in terms of consequences, the more the model is reinforced for their behavior, the more the consequences are such that the behavior is more likely to occur in the future, the more likely an observer is to acquire that information. So in this sense, we can rule Hordak out right at the beginning, because this is a 1980s cartoon. The bad guy always loses. He always ends up having his plan spoiled. He ends up face down in the mud, whatever occurs. He is either positively or negatively punished for his behaviors. So that makes it a lot less likely that Isabella would acquire his behaviors. Same thing with Bo. Bo is not as competent as Shira. Bo gets into trouble. Bo needs to be rescued. Bo's in over his head. He does not get reinforced as much for his behaviors. But Shira, every single time she lifts that sword, she transforms into Shira. Every single time she does that, she basically ends up victorious, gets reinforced for that behavior. And that's one of the reasons why Isabella acquired the knowledge of how to perform that behavior. It was because the model herself was being reinforced. So the consequences of reinforcement made that a lot more likely that the observer was going to acquire that model's behavior. Next factor that affects acquisition is reinforcement for attending to the model. So this one is on me and my wife. This one's on the parents, because as we were watching this program, when Shira was about to do something amazing, we would reinforce Isabella for attending to that model. We would say, hey, take a look, look at this, look at what's going on here. Ooh, wasn't that great? Wasn't that exciting the way she did that spin kick? Ooh, look at this transformation. Isn't that great the way that she's transforming? There's a lot of positive reinforcement for attending to the model of Shira. There was no positive reinforcement for attending to Hordak. At no point did we say, ooh, look at this evil thing that Hordak is doing. Isn't that great? Look at this, like, pay attention here. Ooh, look how bad he is. Never. That never occurred. So it kind of rules out Bo, although I don't think we reinforced her for attending to Bo that much. But he did do things that were worthy of attending to, other than getting captured and getting in trouble. But anyways, Shira was by far the model that Isabella was more reinforced by us for attending to. So while we never reinforced her for actually performing the behavior of lifting the sword, so it definitely is observational learning, she was more likely to acquire it because she was reinforced for attending to the model, for attending to Shira. All right, other factors, skills to benefit from the modeling. So the next factor that affects acquisition is whether or not the observer themselves has the skills to actually benefit from the modeling. So if I'll give you a real life example before we go to Isabella. If you're ever watching one of those do-it-yourself videos, if you're like a do-it-yourselfer, you're either a crafter or you like to fix stuff around the house, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you have probably come across a video that is just way over your head. And you press play and they're like, you take this, you take that, you do this trifold, mega twist, super spiral, and you're like, whoa, I don't have those skills. I don't know what's going on here. You do not have the skills to benefit from the video's modeling of the behavior. Same thing with Isabella. Isabella at 1.5 years old was just developing her fine motor skills, just developing her bodily control, and she had certain skills that allowed her to benefit from modeling behavior, but not anything that was too complex. So you take a look at something like Bo, where in order to model this behavior, first off, you might need a bow. Secondly, you need at least 2 pieces of wood. If she was going to pick up sticks and pretend, you need 1 piece for the bow. You need the other piece, put it at a 90-degree angle, pretend to pull it back, and that would be modeling that behavior. As much as I think highly of my daughter, I don't think she had the skills to do that at 1.5 years old. So she did not have the skills that would benefit from Bo's modeling of that behavior. However, she did have the skills to pick up a stick off of the ground and hold it above her head. That was within her skill repertoire. So because of that, she was much more likely to pick up and model, or pick up and acquire the behavior of holding that sword or holding that stick aloft than anything that Bo might have done with the more complicated modeling of using the bow in that behavior. Hordak, on the other hand, he had simple behaviors as well, as long as you don't actually need to physically change your arm into a laser cannon. But he already has other strikes against him in terms of acquiring those behaviors. All right, so far, Shira's hit all 3. Her consequences are her behaviors reinforced. So as a model, she's reinforced. Isabella was reinforced for attending to Shira more than Bo, and definitely not to Hordak. Isabella had the skills to benefit from Shira's modeling, so she does have the skills to lift that stick above her head. And then the last one, and I found this one just the most fascinating, and this is one of the most important ones. In terms of acquisition, and in terms of observational learning in general, you are more likely to acquire the knowledge of a behavior if the personal characteristics of the model match the characteristics of the observer. So the more you take a look at a model and say, that person is like me, that person has things about them that are like the things that are about me, the more that you share those personal characteristics with the model, the more likely it is that you're going to acquire that behavior. So this was rather fascinating because even at 1.5 years old, the fact that Isabella modeled Shira would indicate that she recognized that there is something about this person here, this female person, that is more like her than either Bo or Hordak. So there's just something about Shira, and she recognized characteristics that she and Shira shared, and that made it more likely for her to acquire the knowledge from Shira rather than from Bo, rather than from Hordak. So Hordak, not even human. Bo, a male with a mustache. All of these things are not shared characteristics, but somehow, even at 1.5 years old, Isabella had this sense that this individual here shares more in common with her, and she was able to, and because of that, she acquired more information. So this is actually a very important part of observational learning. This is one of the more powerful effects of observational learning that we'll see in popular culture. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. So a couple of years ago, Miley Cyrus was in Amsterdam, I believe, where marijuana is legal, and she was given a concert, and she was smoking up on stage, and people here in the States went ballistic. They were outraged. They were like, how can she do this? How can she go up on so irresponsible? Doesn't she know the effect that she might have? And you contrast that with other people that smoke marijuana, like Willie Nelson, and nobody is angry that Willie Nelson is smoking marijuana. Nobody is looking at, images like this and going, I can't believe Willie Nelson is so irresponsible. I can't believe, doesn't he know the effect that he's having? And the difference between those two reactions has to do with observational learning. And the difference between those two reactions has to do with who shares characteristics with Willie Nelson and who shares characteristics with Miley Cyrus. So Miley Cyrus has a lot of characteristics in common with young girls, with young females. And you do not want your young 9, 10, 11-year-old female acquiring the knowledge of smoking marijuana, right? That is something that you get angry about. So even lay people can understand that these children, these younger females, look up to Miley Cyrus as a role model. It's literally the model part is there in the term that we use. And they knew that they were highly likely to imitate or acquire this behavior because it's Miley Cyrus, because she has characteristics that are more in common with young women. And therefore, those young women are more likely to acquire this behavior of smoking marijuana. On the other hand, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody ever say something like, how could Willie Nelson be such a horrible role model for these 70-year-old males? We don't want them, smoking. They're vulnerable at that stage. They'll do anything anybody tells them. They're not. Nobody cares, right? Nobody would get angry at that. And again, it's because you know that a young girl who is acquiring behaviors will look at Willie Nelson the same way Isabella looked at Hordak and say, I got nothing in common with this person. There are no characteristics there that are like my characteristics. So they're not going to say that consciously, but they're going to identify that. So the acquisition of that behavior is going to be rather low. The acquisition of the behavior for elderly males who like country music and like to get on the road again, that's going to be very high. So there might be some 70, 80-year-old males out there who take a look at Willie Nelson, take a look at that photo and say, maybe I will. Maybe I will try this, marijuana now. But we don't really worry about them, right? We're not outraged that they would learn that behavior. So again, you might, it might seem kind of hypocritical that there's outrage for this, but not outrage for this. But again, it has to do with observational learning. Who are the observers that are going to model this behavior? And when they're a group that is seen as vulnerable, then the role models for that behavior are held more accountable. And one of the groups that is vulnerable is children. So the more you are a model for children, the more people will be outraged if you model inappropriate behaviors. All right. That was the factors for acquisition. Any questions or comments on that? All right. So next we have factors that affect performance. So again, acquisition that we just saw is the acquiring of the knowledge to do the behavior. So it's not actually doing the behavior, it's getting the knowledge of how to do that behavior. And those are the factors that influence whether or not an observer will basically pay attention and acquire information from the model. Performance, on the other hand, is once you have acquired that information, how likely are you to actually go out and do that? So how likely are you to actually perform that behavior? What are the factors that determine that? Well, some of them are very similar. So for example, first off, the consequences of the model's behavior. So actually performing the behavior also depends upon what happens to the model after they perform their behavior. You're much more likely to perform the behavior if the model was reinforced for their behavior versus if they were punished for their behavior. And this is one of the big reasons why in any sort of violent entertainment, people always who are advocates against, that type of entertainment will always complain that the violence is gratuitous and the consequences are not shown. So you have people, in an action film, they're killing everybody and, they're just going wild with, crazy over-the-top violence. And the consequences of this violence is never shown. They're never hauled in for a hearing by the military and say, you went way overboard. They never have to make reparations to the families of the enemies that they murdered or killed. There's no consequences for that behavior. Because of that, other people who are observing that are more likely to perform that behavior than if there were consequences to that behavior. So again, Shira's consequences were that her behaviors were reinforced. That made it much more likely that Isabella would also perform that behavior, not just acquire it. This time we're talking about performance. Observer's reinforcement for performing the behavior. So the behavior has been learned, and the behavior has now been performed, but performance will increase, and this is more straightforwardly operant conditioning, if you then reinforce that particular behavior. So once again, this is on the parents in this case. So both me and my wife were thrilled. We love Shira ourselves. And we were thrilled when she held that sword aloft and stretched it out. You can tell because we took about 1 billion photos. But, she was reinforced. We were like, yeah, woo, wow, great job, Isabella, yay, woo, for the honor of Grayskull. She was reinforced for performing that behavior, and that would make it more likely, straightforwardly, to occur in the future. And that's more straight operant conditioning. All right, and the last one that is that affects performance is your observer's history of being reinforced for performing other modeled behaviors. So the observer has a history of reinforcement. Even at a young age of 1.5, Isabella would have a history of reinforcement. And if she was reinforced for performing modeled behaviors, then she is more likely to perform future modeled behaviors, right? So if in the past we were watching one of the leapfrog language learning programs, and the frog comes up and the frog goes, A, this is A. And if Isabella's like, A, and me and her mom are like, whoa, way to go, woo, A, that's correct, yay, woo. We reinforce her for saying A. We have just reinforced her for performing a modeled behavior. She saw the frog say A, she said A, she got reinforced. Every trial that's like that makes it more likely that she will perform future modeled behaviors. So if she has a history of being reinforced for modeled behaviors, she's more likely in the future to perform modeled behaviors as well. On the other hand, if she is punished for performing modeled behaviors, and everybody here who's ever heard their parents or guardians say, if your friend jumped off a bridge, will you jump off a bridge? You're basically being punished for modeling a behavior, right? You're basically being punished for saying, hey, I saw my friend do this, so I did it. And they're like, no, do not do that modeled behavior. Your likelihood of modeling future behaviors goes down. So it's kind of, it's one of those tools where it kind of sounds like it might be counterproductive, but again, we learn much of our behavior from modeling others. We learn a lot of how to fit into culture just by modeling others. And if you don't believe that, try to be a tourist in some destination where you don't pick up on the culture and just take a look at what you'll do. You will get there and you will start looking around and you'll be like, what are other people doing here? How do I, oh, he's doing that. Okay, I'll do that as well. We model, and that's how we learn a lot of our behaviors. And that's one of the reasons why it's very important to have good models that model appropriate behaviors, and people will be very critical of poor models that model inappropriate behaviors. And again, it's just everybody will have a history for performing these model behaviors, and you are more likely to perform a model behavior if previously you were reinforced for performing other modeled behaviors. All right, any final questions Comments on acquisition and observational learning? Or performance in observational learning? All right. Okay, a little bit of a bonus here. So, observational learning, we applied it to why Isabella lifted that stick over her head like it was Shira's sword. Now let's take a look at applying it to the importance of visuals in learning. So, you've often heard the phrase, ooh, I'm a visual learner, ooh, I'm a tactile learner, ooh, I'm this type of learner. Science, psychology has shown that that is mostly false. People do not differ greatly on their learning styles, and it does not impact them greatly in terms of how their learning outcomes. But one thing that is very important and comes directly from observational learning is the importance of visuals in teaching or for learning outcomes. So there was a pamphlet that came out a couple of years ago, and it was titled, What to Do If You Are Witnessing Islamophobic Harassment. So this was when the kind of political tides changed, and because of observational learning, racists were coming out of the woodwork. So if you remember a few years ago, when, I don't want to get too political here, but if you remember a few years ago when the alt-right all of a sudden said, you know what, we're going to come out, we're going to be racist, and we don't want Muslims, and we don't want immigrants, and we don't want this coming in. And all of a sudden they were just popping out, right? You hadn't heard anything for ages, and then all of a sudden, boom, here they came, they exploded. They started performing their behavior. So why did they all of a sudden start performing their behavior? Well, maybe they had a model who was reinforced for performing racist behavior. I'm not going to say who, but somebody got elected. So maybe they had a model that was reinforced for performing those behaviors. Maybe they were reinforced by their friends, by their associates for performing those behaviors. Maybe they looked at that model and said, you know what, he has a lot of characteristics that I have, right? You guys share a lot of characteristics with him, right? We didn't see a lot of African Americans all of a sudden join the alt-right. We didn't see a lot of people with those different characteristics. So all of a sudden they just exploded out of the woodwork because of observational learning. So to kind of combat that, there was a pamphlet that made its way around social media, and it was what to do if you're witnessing Islamophobic harassment. And this is basically what to do if you're witnessing, insert here, any sort of harassment. So if it's homophobic, if it's racist, if it's sexist, whatever sort of harassment you may see. And this was a pamphlet that was making the rounds. And not only does it use observational learning as the tool to stop the harassment, it uses observational learning as well as the tool to teach how to stop the harassment. So let's take a look at the pamphlet first and see what it says to do. All right, so it goes, what to do if you're witnessing Islamophobic harassment, a bystander's guide to help the person who's being targeted. So normally in this situation, socially, if we see an injustice occurring, we'll try to stop the injustice by stopping the person who is perpetrating the injustice. So in this case, we would try to stop the harasser. And if you've seen any of these videos on social media, you'll see people go up to the person and say, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't talk to her that way. And as we're going to see, that's not very effective, because what you are doing in this situation is you are stepping up to this person and you're saying, I'm a model. I'm going to model some behavior right now. And if you yell at them, and if you confront them, and if you get in their face, and if you threaten violence, then they are going to observe you. And through observational learning, they themselves are going to get angrier. They're going to get louder. They're going to perform the behaviors that you're modeling. So this strategy here takes into account the psychological aspects of observational learning. And it basically says, engage in conversation, go to the person that's being harassed, sit beside them and say hello, try to appear calm, collected and welcoming, ignore the attacker. So you're modeling behavior in this instance. You're saying, all right, I am calm. Here's some calm behavior. Why don't you take a look at me and maybe you're more likely to be calm yourself. Here is collected and welcoming. Observe my behavior. You're more likely, the harasser is more likely to be collected and welcoming. ignore the attacker. You're modeling literally ignoring people, hoping that this person will observe your behavior and model that behavior and ignore the person that they're attacking. So they go pick a random subject and discuss it. It can be anything, a movie that you like, the weather, saying you like something they wear, asking them where you got it. Again, modeling appropriate behaviors, not straight engaging with the harasser, because again, they're confronting, they're doing confrontational behavior. The last thing you want to do is model confrontational behavior and just have this feed forward loop that gets worse and worse. So you keep building the safe space, and then you continue the conversation until the attacker leaves and escort them to a safe place if necessary, and then respect their wishes that they tell you they're okay and they just want to go. So this was a pamphlet that was making its way around. And as you can see, in the strategy itself, there's observational learning. So you are, if you're intervening, you are modeling the behavior that you want the harasser to engage in. So you're creating a safe space, but at the same time, you're modeling the very behavior that you want the harasser to engage in, making it more likely that they will engage in that behavior and stop the harassment. The other very interesting thing is that this is basically put into a comic book form. This is basically put into a visual form here. And because of observational learning, this visual form, these pictures that show the behavior being done, anybody who reads this is going to be much more likely to acquire this behavior and perform this behavior than if somebody just read this. So this text-only version has all the information. It's got all the strategies. It's got all the tips, but it's got none of the visuals. And the reason that this is way, way more effective than this is because here you actually see the behavior being performed. You actually see the person sit down. You actually see the person engage in conversation. And your brain, because we're wired this way, cannot help but go through observational learning where your acquisition and your performance are going to be higher. You're going to have a higher chance or a higher amount of both simply because you have visuals in that pamphlet. All right, so any questions about that? All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look at a real life example that shows this principle being put into place. And this happened in Canada when we had a political candidate, Canadian Sikh politician, Jagmeet Singh, and handled hate with love. And what I want you to do is during this video, watch his behavior. So watch Singh over here and see how he engages the person that is attacking him. And see how you can see it during the video where her behavior is going lower and lower and lower and lower. But then some of Singh's aides do the wrong behaviors. They come and they confront her, and you'll see her behavior just ramp right back up. And again, Singh is making the he's using observational learning to model the behavior that he wants her to perform. One moment. He's not being completely silent, that's for sure. All right. Let's try that again.
Wow, this is amazing. First of all, first question. Is my voice hearing better this way, or is the mic better? What do you like better? Hold on, give me 1 second. One second. Can you hear this way? Is this easier with the microphone, or is it better?
All right. So that's a nice example right there. So right off the bat, she's confronting Singh there, and he immediately just ignores her. And what he's doing is he's not confronting her because, remember, she's doing a confrontational behavior. If he starts modeling confrontation, she's going to observe him. She, as an observer, is going to, through observational learning, increase her confrontation, and things are just going to spiral out of control. So what he does is he ignores her. He basically says, one moment, hey, is this microphone okay? Is this microphone okay? And what he's doing is he's saying, hey, here's this behavior of ignoring. Why don't you observe that and pick up on that a little bit and maybe ignore me for a while, right? So he's trying to bring the confrontation down by not modeling confrontational behavior, but by modeling a different behavior, which is his ignoring behavior. And again, very calm, trying to model also a calm behavior. As soon as people step in to confront her, as soon as his supporters step in to confront her, you can see her behavior just goes to the next level because she is observing confrontation, and that is making her confrontation more likely to be performed.
So just 1 second. What do we believe in? We believe in love and courage, right? Love and courage. Love and courage. We believe in love. We believe in love and courage. Absolutely. Absolutely we do. We believe in love and courage. We believe in an inclusive Canada where no one's left behind. We believe in building a Canada that ensures that there's economic justice for everybody, right? And that's what we believe in.
So you see her behaviors are already calmed down, right? He starts talking about love, he starts talking about compassion. People start clapping, she starts clapping, right? It's very hard not to clap when a room's clapping around you. And again, this is all observational behavior, observational learning that is going on.
So my friend, that's it. And you are wonderful. And let's just say, as Canadians, do we believe in celebrating all diversity? Do we believe in celebrating diversity? Give it a round of applause for diversity.
And again,
a round of applause for diversity. All right.
You can see, once again, she's calming down. She's calming down. But once one of his aides, once one of his supporters gets in her face, she ramps it back up because now she's observing confrontation. So as soon as that supporter comes in and starts saying, no, you can see that the harasser's like, It's like, you're going to put your finger in my face? I'm going to put my finger in your face. And it escalates back up. And this, we're not going to play the entire video, but this goes on. And if you watch the whole thing, you get very frustrated with the supporters and the aides because Singh is working very hard. He's very calm the whole time. He's not yelling at her. He's not doing anything, to confront her. He's being very calm. And you could see him bringing down her behavior. And then for some reason, at some point when he does that, the supporters come back in and her behavior just ramps back up. And Singh again tries to bring her down. And we'll fast forward to the end. You can watch it in the links. But basically, he ignores her and does not engage her in any sort of confrontation or any sort of arguments. And in the end,
my friends, we'll just sort this situation out. We'll be right back. I love you all. These are things that happen. It's okay. It's no big deal. We're not going to be intimidated. It's all good.
She leaves. He didn't throw her out. He didn't get security. He left at the end. So again, you can see that this whole strategy through observational learning, you are modeling the behavior that you want a particular individual to engage in. And that's why when two people argue, it escalates when both of them are arguing because they're observing each other and they're observing that behavior and they're continuing to perform that particular behavior. And again, I encourage you to watch the whole 4-minute video, but you can see and watch her behavior, and you can see her behavior going down. Fewer hand waves, fewer, aggressive body postures, until one of the supporters shows aggressive body posture, starts waving her finger, at which point she jumps back up, and then she's brought back down again, and then she jumps back up because of the supporters who are modeling aggressive behaviors. All right, so we are going to wrap up our look at observational learning and operant conditioning by applying observational learning one last time, and this is going to be to understand the bystander effect. So hopefully you've encountered the bystander effect in your general psychology course. This is a very well-known psychological phenomenon. Also has to do with intervention in a society. But basically the basic principle, the basic phenomenon is that in any emergency situation, the probability of getting help is inversely related to the number of bystanders that you have around you. So if you need assistance in our world, in our society, you are much more likely to get it if only one person is in your area than if 10 or 20 people are in your area. And that is very psychologically weird. It's very psychologically, logically, it doesn't make sense. Because if one person is likely to help, well then 20 people should be way more likely to help, right? If you got a 50-50 chance that one person is going to help you, then 20 people, it's like flipping 20 coins. Certainly one of them is going to come up heads. Certainly one of them is going to help you. But the psychological reality is that if you need assistance and there's only one person in your area, you are much more likely to receive that assistance than if there's a bunch of people surrounding you. And that likelihood of getting help goes down and down and down the more bystanders that there are. So let's take a look at an example of that, and then we'll end with an analysis of what is going on here and try to think of how observational learning can explain what is going on in this particular situation.
Place like this street in New York City, if you were unfortunate enough to be the victim of a crime or taken ill unexpectedly, you might think that surrounded by all these people, someone would intervene. After all, isn't there safety in numbers? Psychologists say no. Research suggests that often a victim is less likely to receive assistance when surrounded by a group rather than a single bystander. When people are in a crowd, it's easier to pass the buck. It's what psychologists call the diffusion of responsibility. Liverpool Street Station in London, a busy thoroughfare for commuters. Unknown to these passers-by, Peter is an actor. As part of an experiment on bystander apathy, he's pretending to be ill.
Help. Help.
How long before he gets help?
Help. Help.
Helping would be inconvenient or even risky. He lies there for more than 20 minutes and no one raises an eyebrow.
Please, somebody help.
It's always very distressing to watch situations like this where people are obviously suffering and no one's actually helping them. But what we have here is two conflicting rules. One is the rule that we ought to help, and the other is the rule that we ought to do what everybody else is doing. And here you have effectively a group of strangers who are exerting the pressure not to intervene, not to help. And it's very difficult to rebel.
Ruth, another actor, takes Peter's place. How long before she receives help? Four minutes later, and 34 people have passed without stopping.
Well, people don't really want to know that. They still got time. Well, they have got time, they just don't get involved.
Unwittingly, these strangers have silently formed a temporary group with a rule: don't get involved. They're afraid to stand out from the crowd and won't take action if no one else does. This woman has clearly spotted Ruth, but she conforms to the rule and does nothing. Watch what happens, though, when someone else helps.
You alright?
Yes, thank you.
Sure, you look a bit sleepy, you alright?
She suddenly finds herself in a different group with a new rule: to help.
Shut up. You alright now? Sure.
This is what she was saying.
Then I saw to check to see if he was breathing or not. And I looked around and I couldn't believe that no one had noticed him. So there was a bloke sat there just absorbed in reading a newspaper. This time, Peter's dressed as a respectable gentleman. Now that his dress is in keeping with those around him, how long before he's rescued?
Hello, sir. How do you stay?
6 seconds. She even calls him sir, and suddenly everyone's a good Samaritan.
Do you suffer from epilepsy?
No.
Why you're lying on the floor in the rain?
Because he's part of the right group. Everyone wants to help.
I would just hate to be in his position of feeling ill, and nobody helped him walking past, so I'd just like to check that he was okay.
I thought, well, it's wet, so he must really feel he's going to ruin the suit anyway.
All right, so let's. I'm just going to make a few comments on this, and then we'll end for today. So, the explanations that they had are very cynical. And this seems to have been for a news program or for some sort of sensational, I guess, program. So cynical oftentimes sells. Cynical oftentimes is, good for increasing ratings. But some things don't make sense. So they're always like, well, people are just too busy. People don't want to get involved. Peter, the actor, got no help when he was dressed casually, but as soon as he puts on a business suit, because he's part of the right group, they're implying that because he's a rich individual at this point, he's going to receive the help. So it's very cynical, right? It's a very cynical view of humanity. And sometimes in psychology, I think we need to kind of look for the light a little bit and think to ourselves, what might be going on here? What if people weren't just horrible individuals, right? What if, as humanity, we're actually at our core good? And I think there was a contradiction in there where the psychologist was saying that there's 2 rules that we're abiding by. One is the rule that we ought to help. So we're all walking around with this rule, and we've been taught this since we were little children, that you ought to help, right? Helping is a good behavior. So we have this rule that we ought to help. But then all of a sudden we have this other rule that we ought to not get involved. And the question is, where did that rule come from? Where does this rule that's completely contradictory, you ought to help, but you ought to not get involved, where does that rule come from? So think about that. Think about observational learning and what could possibly explain the fact that people did not do the behavior of actually helping. And I'll give you a couple of clues that would give you a hand. So number 1, Peter, when he was dressed in just normal everyday clothes, nobody came to help him. When he was dressed as a rich individual in a business suit, somebody came to help him immediately. Remember what that last person in the video said. He said, I knew he must have needed help because it was raining and he was going to ruin his suit. All right, so that's clue number 1. It was raining and he was going to ruin his suit. Clue number 2, if the psychologist was correct, and we have this rule that we ought to help, but we also have this rule that we ought to not get involved, then there's going to be a conflict there. And we would be walking by this person who needs help, and we would say to ourselves, you know what, I ought to help. Ooh, but I ought to not get involved. But I should help. But I should I ought not to get involved. There'd be this conflict, right? Because we're trying to keep 2 incompatible rules in play at the same time. If somebody went to help that individual, if we were sitting there going, should I help, should I not? Don't get involved, follow, do the helping behavior. What should I do? What should I do? If somebody started helping that individual, then the need to provide them help would have been gone. And our ability to follow the rule of don't get involved would have occurred. So if it's true that we're trying to follow those 2 rules, as soon as an individual gets help, we could be like, oh, shoot, I'm glad they got help. I'm off my way. I'm not going to get involved. But notice what happened. As soon as one individual started helping the person that was pretending to be ill, all of a sudden everybody came around. So that occurred with her. Right? So as soon as one person helps, all of a sudden everybody else starts coming by. and saying, ooh, are you okay? Do you need help? Ooh, what's going on here? So again, why would it be that a crowd would form if all of a sudden one person gets help? If anything, as soon as the person got help, people should really just go on their way because there's no moral obligation. They don't need to help. So why does a crowd form? Think about observational learning. And then clue number 3 is who was the first person to help? So it is very telling when you look at, when you look at that individual. All right, sorry about that. When you look at that individual, he had a jumpsuit on, he had overalls on, he had construction boots on, he had like a tool belt with tools on. That was the first person that offered help to this individual. And notice there was no hesitation. So if you saw the African American woman, she was walking and she was kind of like, do I go? She didn't know, she was questioning. What behavior should she do? The construction worker, however, saw this individual and literally just walked right up to her and said, are you okay? Are you feeling all right? No hesitation, no nothing. So think about what a construction worker goes through. Think about their on-the-job training. So you got those 3 clues. Why did Peter get picked up way more when he was in his expensive suit? Way quicker. Remember the person that said, well, Yatu needed help because he's going to ruin his suit because it was raining. Number 2, why do people all of a sudden come and join in as soon as one person helps? Because that's counterintuitive. They should just leave if they're going to leave. Once one person helps, it alleviates any moral obligation. And 3, why was the first person that helped this individual a construction worker? What is it about their training that would make that? And try to tie it all up with observational learning. All right, so that is it. I know we had a lot more, but we'll catch up on that next time. So next time we're going to meet in here. We'll have class as usual, and then we also have our final catch-up class this Friday. So again, that special online class. I will make the video. I will post it to YouTube, and then we will be completely caught up. And next week we're going to be doing ethics. So wrapping it up, trying to finish strong for the end of the semester. So that is it for today.